Quackity quack! We are backity back with a brand new episode of the Duck on a Rock Sports Podcast. I'm Matt McDonough, joined with me behind the glass is our producer Matt. We met, and our guest tonight is Tim Fontenault. Tim is a former coworker from the Daily Campus and the Hartford Courant. His other past stops include Swish Appeal, SB Nation, and most notably ESPN. Tim, welcome to the show. We're glad to have you. How are you doing tonight?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing pretty well.
So, Tim, you've pursued another avenue as far as work now, but you still stay very involved in sports. You're a season ticket holder for both the UConn men's basketball team, women's basketball team, and the Connecticut Sun. To kind of get us started here with a couple appetizers, obviously the UConn women had a crash landing in the Final Four, to say the least, finishing the season 38-1. Um, the fireworks, however, were more so with Geno's halftime interview as well as the post-game handshake with Don Staley. Can you kind of give me your thoughts on how the season ended, as well as the Geno Staley feud?
Oh man, obviously the end of the season extremely disappointing. I thought the entire way. You can say what you want about the strength of schedule. You can say all these things about the Big East and this and that, but it was such a profound disappointment after they were the best team in the country the whole way up until that game against South Carolina. They were just so good defensively. They had obviously the best player in the country in Sarah Strong. AZ Fudd was unbelievable, and their defense was so good all season. And it just going into that South Carolina game, I felt like we should have taken care of them. I knew it was going to be a tough game, but I wasn't expecting that. It was, to me, it was a lack of effort. I didn't see any willpower in that game. Defensively, I think they did the job, but on the offensive end, they were just getting swallowed up. There was no effort to help Sarah, no effort to help AZ, and the two of them just looked so out of rhythm. They were rushing shots, they were kind of forcing things, and they just very quickly in that game, it all just fell apart and they got in their heads. And obviously that led to quite a stunning end to the season, which then translated into what we saw at the end of the game. And, I don't know, I can't defend what Geno did. That was obviously a little over the top and very, very surprising. We know he can get fired up, but that was something entirely different. And, I'm not Don Staley's biggest fan. So I think, they both could have handled that a lot better, but overall, I think they both just want to move on, and they both got rosters to rebuild. And then in November or December, they play at Mohegan Sun Arena, and it's going to be a fun little rematch with a lot of underlying stories to it.
Yeah, and I definitely think it was an unfortunate, out of character sort of few minutes there for Geno, for sure. As you said, in terms of just the game itself, he even said kind of after the halftime complaints about the refs and the six fouls in one quarter. Even though it's been, I think the validity in his argument has been kind of proven to be wrong, where like there's no, I've seen on Twitter like there was a pregame handshake, and that was one of his talking points. There is video of Strong ripping her own jersey, so think that's
Yeah.
kind of weakened his stances, obviously, for sure. I think the apology and then the second apology, like that whole process was botched. But as you said, it appears both of them have kind of moved forward, um, and looking, toward the future. But that's the blessing and the curse of the tournament. And luckily, it's gone a lot of the times in UConn's favor, but it has happened with the UConn women more often than not this last decade, where one poor shooting night in the Final Four, a great regular season, a great tournament run can come to an end just off. You have two bad quarters. The other team, I mean, in this case, South Carolina beat them for sure. UConn didn't lose a game. South Carolina beat them.
Yeah.
It was definitely a disappointing end. And I did talk to a guy this weekend where he did kind of defend Geno in terms of his. I mean, I can't defend him lashing out like that. I think it was just terrible optics and a bad look, especially when that's your one loss in the season and you kind of take, even if it's not directly, indirectly, you're taking it away from South Carolina in their moment and kind of making it something that it shouldn't be. But he did say what other coach is considered a failure for losing in the Final Four. He's probably the
Yeah.
only one who's that pressure. So that opened my mind a little bit. Yeah, any other thoughts on it before moving on to the UConn men?
Yeah, I just think it's obviously, like you said, it's unfortunate the way that whole situation played out. I think, we have seen, like you said, that one loss in the season coming in the Final Four. We've seen it in pretty remarkable fashion. I think one of my all-time favorite Geno reactions is after that Mississippi State buzzer beater, that first one that shocked the world, to carry a phrase from the UConn men. And you look at him and he just looks over at Vic Schaefer, who was the coach at Mississippi State at the time, and he just kind of has that little smile on his face and shrugs, throws his hands up. Like, what can you do? Like, that was just such a great play. And so I'm sure people would have liked to have seen more of that side of Geno. What we do know is that there's Dawn Staley's kind of this new age Pat Summitt in Geno's life, where they're two of the best coaches, arguably the two best coaches in the sport. They're the faces of the sport. Their rivalry is between the two schools is massive. It's everything about women's basketball right now. And that, I feel like sometimes, especially in this new rise of women's basketball, which has been phenomenal, I think a lot of times there's this perception among fans that they want all of these coaches and players to be friends, but you have these huge rivalries, these it's all or nothing between these teams, and they don't have to like each other. You want to see more respect, but you want to see that rivalry too. Like, how great was UConn Tennessee back in the late 90s, early 2000s? And I think Diana Taurasi said it best when she was like, they don't have to be friends. Like, why do you need them to be friends? They don't even have to like each other. It's, that's what makes the rivalry so great. So I hope it can get back to just being that, two teams that really just don't like each other. And we just see that come out in, some kind of fiery battle on the floor and none of the extracurricular off of it.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I do still think that, at least at the moment, and I know Bill Belichick wasn't the best at shaking hands after losses either, so this might sound a little hypocritical, but yeah, definitely that the handshake piece, I think, does kind of come across as a lack of respect for sure. But as you said it perfectly, it is sports. It's competition. The Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese rivalry sort of created this renaissance that wasn't seen with the vitriol and almost hatred since UConn Tennessee. And that's where it does make the game more exciting. It's talked about more. The sports 24-hour news cycle where a national championship is won, and then it's kind of the top 25 for the next year immediately, the next day. It's good to have women's basketball in that window for as long as possible, and they shouldn't like each other. It is, even if they are at a coach's summit or meeting in the off season, friendly, when it's between the lines, there should be a level of dislike, or at least, wanting to beat each other as much as you can. So I do think, as you said before, though, them moving forward definitely gives an avenue for all of us to move forward as well, and look forward to the regular season meeting. So another first for UConn. A few years ago, the women suffered their first loss in the national championship game. It's bound to happen eventually for the UConn men too. The UConn men are finally a national runner-up in the national championship game for the first time ever, losing to Michigan. What are your feelings on? Obviously, the Braylon Mullins shot will live on forever. That's an accomplishment, making the Final Four by itself. But what are your thoughts on how the season ended, and kind of how you want to look at this team historically?
I normally don't do very well when UConn loses, whether it's the men or the women. I usually let it simmer for a while. But I was so at peace, like, immediately after that game. I was so proud of the way that the men's team fought to get to get to the Final Four. Obviously, that comeback against Duke, we're going to talk about forever. The shot for Braylon Mullins, we're going to talk about until the end of time. And to get to the national championship game after that was exactly what this team was capable of all season. We just didn't necessarily see it every single game. We saw some really ugly wins against Georgetown and DePaul. We saw some disgusting losses against Creighton and Marquette. St. John's had our number this season, but when it mattered, we knew this team was capable of doing this, and they were able to pull themselves out of the depths against Duke and get to this point. And then you just ran into a buzzsaw against Michigan. And against that buzzsaw, with a great scout by Mike Nardi. Have to give him a huge shout out, assistant coach Mike Nardi, with Silas Demery playing injured with solo ball, having a bad shooting wrist, a bad ankle, you name it. Jalen Stewart just getting healthy in time for the tournament. I mean, everyone stepped up, and they played such a fantastic game against Michigan. They dragged them into one of those old-fashioned Big East grind-out battles, and they just didn't hit enough shots. I mean, they came really, I keep saying they came 3 shots short of winning the national championship. That's really all it was to it. I think the game plan was excellent. I think they executed it really well. And you know how it goes when you get to the Final Four, playing in those football stadiums with those brand new rims. Sometimes they just get a little too bouncy on you. And we got the luck of it a couple times against Illinois. And that one that hung on the back of the rim forever and then just fell right off. But those are the breaks sometimes, and so you got to be. Sometimes you're not going to win the national championship every time you get there, and we're so used to that being the case. You just got to say this was an incredible season, and then you quickly you move on. You think about all the good times with Alex Karaban and Terrace Reed and obviously these guys who were only here for the 1 year. I mean, Alec Millender kind of became a cult hero during the tournament. Malachi Smith was unbelievable. Dwayne Caroma had his moments during the season, so all those guys get some love. But now it's time to rebuild and get right back to it.
Yeah, and I particularly liked Malachi Smith a lot. Definitely had a Marcus Smart type style
Yeah,
to him, even though Marcus Smart is no longer in my worldview with him being in LA. But yeah, definitely. I loved how Smith would, shoot a three, know it was off, get the offensive rebound, and then kick it out, and it'd become an offensive rebound and an assist. He played hard. Reed was an incredible kind of throwback player to watch. I really, really hope he can get a cup of coffee in the NBA at least. I know it seems as though they're not projecting him to be in the NBA. Sanogo wasn't in the NBA very long, but I definitely hope he can be part of the UConn alumni in the NBA. Yeah, as you said, with Michigan, they were the best team. Obviously, they were above and beyond most of the tournament, but the point of pride for sure is that UConn made it an ugly game. I think that was the only way they were going to have a chance at winning, and they hung with them. As you said, missing the 15 or 18 straight threes, it's going to be an uphill climb to be able to win a game if you're needing a few of those to drop during that span. But they kept it close. There were moments here and there where they could have made it one possession game or a 4-point game, more so, and then they would be more within striking distance. But Michigan had to play their game. They held them well below their point total average for the tournament. And you mentioned Karaban. Can you kind of give a sort of your salute to him, sign off to him as he ends his career with 2 national championships and 3 Final Four?
yeah. I mean, what can you say about Alex Karaban? I felt like even at the start of the season, my friends and I were kind of somewhat joking about it that on senior day we needed to see his name go up in the Huskies of Honor. But as the season went on, it just became more and more clear that this guy, like, it needed to happen while he was still on campus, while he was still in uniform, not something that he comes back a couple of years later. Because I mean, his career just unbelievable. The most starts, the most games played, the most wins, 6 on the all time scoring list, the most 3-pointers made. and such a huge part of two national championships and getting the three Final Fours. It's unheard of, especially in this age of college basketball with NIL and the transfer portal. And, just for a fairly local kid to come in and have that kind of impact without ever being the star player on any of the teams he played on. 23, 24, he was, third, fourth option in those offensive sets. Every possession was the one that determined the game when he was on the floor. It was do or die every single time. And he gave everything and then some for the program. And you could see so much of Dan Hurley in him, and you could see so much of Alex and Dan Hurley. They were perfect for each other as a coach and a player. And just, I cried when he went into the Huskies of Honor when I saw that was going to be the case. And I was so scared I wasn't going to get to that game. After the blizzard, I was in Cape Cod for work for that week. I missed the St. John's game. I missed the women's game. I missed the hockey game. So I was like, I'm not going to make it back for senior day. I need to be at Alex's senior day. And it worked out. I was just able to get there. And I saw that he was going to go in the Huskies of Honor, and I just started losing it. And so he deserves all of the praise. He deserves to be remembered as one of the greats. And he's going to end up back on the UConn bench at some point, I think, as a member of this coaching staff. That seems like the perfect next step after he gives the NBA a go for a little while.
Yeah, and hopefully he has staying power in the NBA. And it's great you made it back for that. Probably the worst time of the year to be, even though it was a work trip, to be on Cape Cod. But it's great you made it back to see him go in. And I think too, we've seen Cam Spencer being a factor in the NBA. Sometimes the NBA game is completely different than what it was. And a guy like Karaban, if he can consistently make a three, he will have staying power. So I do think it's weird for me because the lasting image to me will be not the wins, but the last loss there. And even though this happened way before I was alive, but my dad always talks about 1967, how the Sixers beat the Celtics in 6 games in the Eastern Division Finals. Then I think it was called, and they had a banner that said "Boston is dead." And when Bill Russell died in 2022, there was a video circulating of Philadelphia's Billy Cunningham talking about the Celtics losing that game. And the Sixers were way up. They went on with Will Chamberlain, um, and Bill Russell was still in the game, and that was the end of the Celtics' 8 straight 9 of 10 years in his career. And then the next 2 years, he won 2 titles as player coach. But that was his first year as player coach with the Celtics in '67, and so he was still out there, and he was playing till the final whistle, and tried to block a shot, got a rebound, and then kind of looked to give an outlet pass as the buzzer was sounding. And Billy Cunningham said that he played as though he couldn't believe, like, the scoreboard must be wrong. I don't lose. And that's kind of the lasting image of Karaban there, because the last image we have of him is sprinting down for that loose ball at the final buzzer and then passing it up despite the game being in hand, it being over. It was a very eerily similar situation to the clip that was circulating in 2022 about Bill Russell. And in a way, they both kind of have that team first mentality, and not believing the scoreboard's correct when they're losing. And then there is this one picture, because I always my 2 annual tweets amongst many others, one of which is how long it takes the Stanley Cup winner to finally shake the Stanley Cup losers' hands in the handshake line. The other one is when during March Madness, when you have players celebrating a championship, the producers always love to cut to the boring coach handshake line, which I guess kind of shows my hypocrisy, because we just talked about Geno Daly. need at least one camera running for that. But they showed May, and then they were showing like Reed and players on the sideline. I didn't even know Michigan won it. Like the first 35 seconds, they didn't show Michigan's players, but there was a photo of Karaban because he ran to the other end of the court. Michigan is kind of swarming and celebrating, and he just kind of can't believe it. So it was not the end you wanted to see, but it was kind of a perfect ending to encapsulate who he is as a player, giving it his all right to the bitter end in this case. But I do think before moving on, the inverse of Geno Staley line, I was very impressed with Dan Hurley. I know uh, his sort of decorum on this lacking, but I thought him in the loss was as gracious as ever. I was so impressed with him throughout the tournament. Even with the free throw disparity in the first half, I know it may have been tongue in cheek, his post game press conference talking about how much he loved the refs, but I do think there was a genuineness to his appreciation of this team, and he didn't want to step on Michigan's moment or kind of have a meltdown there. So, what did you think of Hurley in terms of this tournament run and kind of seeing him losing in the biggest stage and handling it with?
Yeah, I thought it was great, and I will say the when he had that question about the refs in the post game press conference, I think part of what made it so funny to me was that it was teed up by Zach Brazilier from the New York Post, so someone who's very familiar with him, a St. John's local reporter, so kind of knew the perfect way to go at Dan there, and get a good laugh out of him and lead to what was probably a sarcastic comment, but he, like you said, he didn't want to take away from Michigan's day. And look, I've seen even we're more than a week out from that game, and I keep seeing stuff about the refs in that game were so bad toward UConn. And look, I love to criticize the refs. I've had my share of goes at James Breeding, who I don't think he should have been on that game. I think that there are plenty of questions to ask about how the officials were assigned for the Final Four, but I seem to be in the minority when I say that they really didn't impact the game as much as I would have expected if I had not seen the game and seen all the discourse afterward. I don't think that they really made as much of an impact as people want to think. Yeah, there was a huge foul disparity, but think about the size and the athleticism of Michigan compared to UConn, who UConn generally is a big athletic team. That's kind of the way Hurley needs to build his teams. And he did a much better job of that this year after kind of going smaller last year and kind of getting away from what made his team so competitive. But Michigan was still so much bigger, so much more athletic. And the way UConn plays defense so aggressively, they were bound to foul. And I think that was part of what was built into the game plan going into it. A lot of the talk was you're going to need the bench to step up because you're going to have guys that probably get one or two guys into foul trouble in the first half, and you knew that you were going to run them up. So I don't think it was as big a deal. So I don't think there was much for Dan to get too mad about during the game. And I think that he's shown. I gotta be careful because I know that there have been moments where it's not the case, but he's shown growth in terms of his sideline behavior. He really doesn't want to make it about him. When he does, it seems like it's sort of protectionism, to pull focus away from, the struggles of the players and stuff like that. But, I think that overall he was very well behaved and did a phenomenal job coaching throughout the tournament. I also think that the thing with Roger Ayers, the so-called headbutt, wasn't really much of anything. Roger Ayers will be the first person to tell you that too. It's just an incredible, funny moment from probably the biggest character in the sport. So just, looking forward to more Dan antics and more winning as we move forward here.
Yeah, and I think it kind of in a way was his most impressive tournament run, not to take away obviously from the dominance of 2023 and 2024, but the expectation wasn't there, as you said, with how the regular season title was lost in the final weeks, as the Big East Tournament Championship game was a dud. It was less expected, which made it a little more joyous. And there is growth. Even a book I'm reading, borrowed from a potential listener, as well as listeners, a family member of listeners. I'm about halfway through it, which reflects my slow reading skills because I've had this book for months. But it is the Hurley autobiography, and he talked about losing the state championship game with St. Benedict's Prep to Lawrenceville, who had Joe Kim Noah, and he had J.R. Smith. And he did say an assistant was tossed first when they were down 41-12, but he got thrown out of the game when they were down 24 points, and they lost the game 90-68. But I think J.R. Smith got ejected. There was the AD got ejected, who I'm guessing there the AD might be a priest. But the point is, there was a complete and utter meltdown, which from there's obvious growth. Without that goes without saying, compared to losing that state championship with losing a national championship. But overall, and even as a Kevin Ollie apologist, I just love how Hurley acknowledges the coaches who came before him. I think it was after Duke and after Illinois. He talked about the Standard Calhoun and all, said how they both won it, because I will never, despite what people might think, like Bob Diaco got $5 million at the buyout that was uncontested. So I'm glad Kevin Ollie got his money. But despite how it ended, I'm glad he always acknowledges who was the head coach winning that 2014 title, and always talks about Calhoun as well glowingly, who built this and made it what it is today. That has not made Dan Hurley's job any easier in terms of expectations, but he's quick to always, as the phrase goes today, give flowers to those who deserve it. And then, as you said, kind of just with that loss, taking the higher ground. And I think the whistle was frustrating. I don't love when a team's the bonus when someone's trying to play, but there was only really 3 or 4 calls to sort of nitpick, moving screen here and there. I think Emery's last was like a cheap reach.
Yeah.
Like Michigan guard did like the SGA Brunson kind of cool one time, so there's a couple foul baiting. But other than that, as you said, there was a mismatch. UConn did well taking the punches, having an incredible season. So, I think that's how we'll remember this team with pride, despite the fact that there wasn't a parade. It was still an awesome season. It was joyous to watch. So something, a topic a little less joyous, but this is of course I wanted to talk to you about. So this will kind of control the rest of the conversation tonight. Is the Connecticut Sun their announced move to Houston following the conclusion of this season. As we record now, the WNBA draft is taking place. The Sun have signed Brittany Griner this week. Not really more for this year, but more for the future for the Houston native as they go back. The Comets will be back. I've seen interviews with Cheryl Swoops. Kevin Durant mentioned the return of the Comets will also giving a shout out to the UConn women. So it has been a conversation both in WNBA and NBA circles lately. As a Connecticut Sun season ticket holder, just give me your initial thoughts. Sort of, I know it's a passionate topic, so I'd love to dig deep. But what were your initial thoughts? Did you see the writing on the wall for a long time here, or was it still a surprise?
Yeah, I think the writing's been on the wall for a little while. And let me rephrase that. The sale of the Sun has been in the makings for a while. The relocation is, at this point, it's not shocking, but it still is in a way, if that makes sense. It's infuriating. It's insulting. It's despicable. I can keep using many synonyms like that. But I want to say first, in terms of the actual sale of the team and why the Mohegan Tribe did this, the Mohegan Tribe has been an unbelievable steward of the Connecticut Sun for 23 years. They saw a failing franchise in Orlando, the early days of the WNBA, 6 years in, the Orlando Miracle were failing, and the Tribe saw an opportunity to buy this team for $10 million and bring it to a place that loved women's basketball. It was a very no-brainer situation. Connecticut loves women's basketball. Let's bring a professional team that has Nikisha Sales, a UConn legend. We'll bring in Rebecca Lobo, and we have this, the Mohegan Tribe had this brand new arena at the casino. They wanted a big event to fill it. Put the Connecticut Sun there. Perfect. They became the first team in league history to turn a profit, which was a big deal. They competed right from the start. They were in the WNBA finals back-to-back years in the mid-2000s. They have continuously been one of the top teams in the league. They had a little bit of a dip in the early 2010s, but they were in a rebuild, and it all came to a head at right around the coming out of COVID. They had a phenomenal team led by Alyssa Thomas, DeWanna Bonner, Brianna Jones, that had multiple opportunities over the course of 4 or 5 seasons to win the WNBA title and just kept falling short. And that window closed. And as it was closing, these players were getting older, their contracts were expiring, and the league was at a place that it had never been before, led by this huge boost in college viewership with Caitlin Clark and Paige Beckers and Angel Reese, those big names that were coming through. In turn, that led to also a boom that we've seen across women's sports, whether it's the WNBA, the NWSL. Women's soccer in Europe is massive now. We're talking about professional volleyball now. It's one of those things where the team was so successful and the ownership was so great for the team, but the boom led to a situation where they outgrew the Mohegan Tribe's ownership. They outgrew Mohegan Sun Arena. It was difficult. You couldn't build a practice facility because everything has to come to a vote by the tribal council that has to think about the best interests of the citizens of the Mohegan Nation. That has to be their first thought. And, it led to things where, Alyssa Thomas was talking about they're getting ready for the playoffs and they're putting the dividers down around the court because there's a birthday party in the facility that they're using for practice. It wasn't ideal anymore. It wasn't a destination anymore. Players want to play in cities, play where the lights are brightest, and playing in Uncasville, Connecticut is not necessarily where the lights are brightest. The inside the casino, it can get pretty dim sometimes. They don't want you to see the sunlight, but it was so good for so long, and the Tribe wanted to do right by the team, by the fans, and by the league. And so they explored the idea of putting the team up for sale, which led to the official, we're going to put the team up for sale. And they went into this with the expectation that there would be interest in keeping the team in Connecticut, which would have been the best situation. There would have been potentially interest in moving the team to Boston. And the league decided that it was going to go in a different direction. They were going to control the whole thing. And that's how we got to this point where the team is now moving to Houston for less money than would have been given by a group in Hartford, a group in Boston. And you're now leaving New England without a team for the time being. And so that's where I'm so angry. I wanted to see the Sun put in the best hands. That didn't happen. And the WNBA decided they were going to leave money on the table for potential future revenue, which, sure, obviously they're a business. They want to make money. They see an opportunity for a $400-500 million expansion team in Boston in the 2030s. Sure. But for the time being, to deprive such a huge women's basketball fan base of a team and undercutting a native tribe in the process just leaves such a bad taste in my mouth that I'm I'm so devastated that I'm completely losing my team. And so I'm going to enjoy this season for what it is. I'm solely focused on the Sun. I'm not watching any other WNBA. I used to watch every game that I could, whether it was Minnesota versus, back in the day, Sacramento or, San Antonio. I've been watching since there were originally teams in Detroit and Cleveland and Philadelphia and Charlotte that are now in the process of getting teams back. But I don't want to be around anymore because the WNBA basically said they don't want me as a customer anymore. So I'm not going to be a customer. I'm going to support the heck out of the Sun this year. I'm so excited about Brittany Griner coming in. They've made a couple of other great signings. Olivia Nelson-Ododa is back. They brought in Kennedy Burke from the New York Liberty. They're going to put a team out there that's going to fight. And I'm just looking forward to this one last year with them. And then, my women's basketball viewing is going to be, obviously college nonstop and then Unrivaled, and support the ownership there of, some UConn alums and support the players that way. But the WNBA lost my business with this.
Yeah, and a completely understandable stance. And for those watching on YouTube, and I'm not going to kind of say I'm someone I'm not, because I went to one Connecticut Sun game last year, saw you there. That was great. I covered one way back in the day, and this hat is a new old stock off eBay. In solidarity with you, Tim, I did put painter's tape over the WNBA logo. Right, this logo itself being, I think, a couple decades old here. But there is the confusion to me, and I wish my brother, he's busy being a father right now, um, to my nephew, but him being better, more well versed with history. I think the unironic aspect or element is that this is the Mohegan tribe not having autonomy to sell their franchise. Like it's a again a modern way hyperbolic comparison, but this is sort of how it's been throughout American history. That you have the Mohegan tribe having something of theirs, and Boston offers 325 million. As you said, the Connecticut group, Hartford slash whatever the situation would have been if they still played in Uncasville, a handful of games around Hartford. They offered more than 300 million. And then the WNBA kind of just says, no, it's a record sale because it's 300 million, and yeah, you made a lot of return on your investment, but we're going to pick where we're putting it. It just seems wrong from that angle. And I know we disagree. Where if there was a place to move the team, I wouldn't have minded Boston. As you said, the New England market would have been there. One thing that I saw was just idiotic when last spring or it was over the summer, last August, driving back from a Red Sox game, the sports talk radio, idiots up there. I forget which one it was, the Hub or EI, were like, well, if they moved to Boston, they could play half the games in Ball. And it's like, no, if they move to Boston, you play in Boston. Why would you play UMass Ball? That's defeat purpose. But I think with the Sun, it's just a weird thing to just keep them out of that market. And I understand what you're saying. I know the Liberty have a facility in the works. I know the new CBA has kind of pushed the game forward, especially based on revenue projections. How the league will become more popular and make more money. Therefore, we need to be in bigger markets. Houston is a huge market. In my opinion, I've been to Houston twice. It's a huge market. It's not a great sports town.
Yeah.
Like the Rockets have had a lot of success over in NBA terms, because not a lot of teams have had great success. But the Rockets have made finals in the 80s. They won 2 finals in the 90s. They're competitive. The owner is a cajillionaire, but even the arena he built at the University of Houston is not a huge arena. It's small. So what's confusing to me is, one, why you make a team take less. Two, yes, the Comets, okay, we're bringing back an original team, but there was a reason why the Comets left. They won 4 straight titles. They still couldn't keep the team there. I know the league was in its infancy, but they are bringing back Portland Fire this year. The Cleveland, I'm assuming it'll be the Rockers again eventually. Like you said, Philadelphia is getting the team. Toronto, Tempo are going to start play this year. So they are trying to get back to the major markets and kind of put, kind of attach themselves to the NBA franchises in the market. But I think
Exactly.
unique. Uh, well, one you said, as you said, it wasn't working with the Orlando Magic. You know, the Miracle.
Yeah,
It was not down there, and you put it in a basketball market for the women's team, and it worked for so long. Even this Sun game we went to last year was still packed. The tickets were very cheap on the secondary market, but it was still packed, and the fans were into it despite it being a lost year with like 2 games left in the season. I just don't know um, enough where even the Washington Mystics, the Chicago Sky, the Atlanta Dream, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't the majority of their games still at smaller capacity arenas or on par with the Connecticut Sun? It's not as though they're playing every game where the Hawks and Bulls play.
yeah,
Is that correct?
yeah, exactly. And my favorite is you look at the Dallas Wings, and obviously they're in the middle of a massive rebuild, bringing in now as of tonight both Paige Beckers and AZ Fudd, which is a hell of a dynamic duo to have as women's sports continues to boom. Those are two massive faces in the sport, and they're still playing their games at UT Arlington. And they were supposed to move into Dallas this year. I believe that's on hold, but that brings me to the other part that's spinning my head around. And but I say all this knowing full well that it's not very transparent. The WNBA, or it is very transparent. The WNBA wants these teams, like you said, in the hands of NBA owners. They want to keep everything in house. The Mohegan Tribe was a threat to that, with the Connecticut Sun being outside the NBA circle. But in terms of the idea of relocating the team, that's one of the things that's really set me off is saying, well, Boston didn't bid for an expansion team. Hartford didn't bid for an expansion team is the one that really lost me when Adam Silver said that. When he said that Hartford wasn't considered because they didn't apply for an expansion team. What do you mean? The drive from Hartford from People's Bank Arena to the where I'm just going to use the parking lot that I use in Mohegan, the winter parking lot at Mohegan Sun Casino is maybe 45 minutes at the most. That's getting across some cities. And that's like moving the Wings from Arlington into Dallas proper. I've had to make that drive from Dallas to Arlington for the Final Four before. It's a long one. The New York Liberty, not that long ago, were playing in Westchester and got to move into Brooklyn with no resistance from the league. Obviously, you want them playing in Brooklyn instead of Westchester, but you should also want the Sun playing in, you know, I'm going to keep using Connecticut. I know Boston was an option. I know that was the preferred option for a lot of people, but I think there would have been room for Boston and Hartford and Houston. You could have moved this team into Hartford to the middle of the state. We know, yeah, it can get a little crazy trying to get into Hartford, but you've got 84 and 91 there. It connects the whole state. It's a beautiful, it's a bigger arena, not necessarily beautiful, but they did put some lipstick on it over last summer, and they made it into a much nicer looking arena. They've got some new amenities in there. It would be a perfect spot for the WNBA. With the popularity of UConn women's basketball, what they've meant to the state for 40 years. Um, you know, Obviously most WNBA teams have a UConn star on it. It's always a great thing when they come back and they play at the casino. It's always, a great event, but it would be so simple over the summer to have 20 something games in downtown Hartford. You'd have It would be so good for so many people. It would be good for the league. It would be good for the city. It would be good for the state. And they just never even considered it because it would be a relocation. That's wild to me. That's absolutely wild. So it just, that never made any sense to me. And it's one of the things that really set me off about the whole process. And when I realized that the whole thing was doomed was when they said that was the case. And I'm just like, you got to be kidding me.
When and Houston, the city limits to Houston's about the size of Rhode Island.
Yeah.
That's something where Houston, and I'm not well versed with the geography of Houston, but let's just throw, and I'll probably look it up later, and they're right next to each other. But say they're playing at the Toyota Center, which is downtown, which Houston downtown Houston, from what I remember, is a lot of parking there. But they if they were to play in the Rockets arena, and let's say over the off season they do renovations in time for the NBA season, and then they're relegated to a University of Houston or a Rice or something of that nature, that distance, if you factor in traffic, maybe not mileage, could be equidistant in terms of minutes between a drive from Uncasville to Hartford, or
Yeah.
whatever you want to compare it to. And the other thing that, and you've mentioned it twice with Adam Silver, and I do like Silver in a lot of areas. Other areas, I think he's really dropped the ball. Especially, I think there's going to be sort of a remedy for tanking that needs to be maybe figured out by someone other than him, because as good as the Yale point guard was 2 years ago, and I love seeing Yale guys in the NBA like the Jazz, Mavericks, and other teams are kind of getting called out, and rightfully so here as this regular season ended. But they have um, just for this notion of the application for expansion, it just seems as though it was never going to happen, as you said. Like it wasn't. They did not want the team staying in the state. They wanted to have them with an NBA ownership group, even though they kind of said no to the Celtics, and not so many words, or almost maybe are trying to get them to do the expansion fee. Um, and who knows, for Tita in Houston, he kind of made out with the relocation, I'm sure, compared to an expansion team. But it's clear they're reverting back to the original model, and I do think, despite the projections of revenue, I'm sure it helps save the NBA in the interim. There has to be another reason for this, because they want eyeballs or population of these areas. And I know with Dallas and then having a team in Houston, okay, that's two in Texas. I know with Detroit and Cleveland coming back, okay, that's two in the area. No, well, now the Liberty are alone, the Phillies coming in. But you could have, you said it, if they even had an expansion team in Boston and then a team in Huntsville and slash Hartford and then the Liberty, that's three teams, and then you got Philly. That's where the people are. Like
Yeah.
the population, aside from California, that Bosch corridor, read up the Mystics, Philadelphia with Don Staley coaching them, and Liberty and Sun in Boston, like that could have worked, and then even the travel would have been easier. I think it's just a weird. It was clear, as I said, that the writing was on the wall. I do have a question in terms of. Um, I do have one question in terms of the front office, but let's pause 10 seconds as we give a shout out to our sponsor. All right, we're back on the Duck on a Rock Sports podcast here with Fontenault discussing the Connecticut Sun move to Houston. And one thing I did want to ask you, just in terms of how the front office has behaved, you did mention how the veteran contracts were coming off the books. Players were kind of on the tail end of their careers, and that core that were on the cusp of championships, their best basketball was behind them. Did you see any other moves that would kind of indicate maybe a major league-esque fire sale to move the team out? I know the Oakland Athletics, real Major League Baseball, not that they've ever really paid players much, but following the pandemic, they really cut payroll and then raised ticket prices to kind of say, hey, well, we're not getting the attendance, even though the team sucks. And Fisher, the Gap, I guess his parents own Gap or something, so the line to Oakland fans, as hard as it's been on you, it's been even tougher on me. And you parallel with like some of the actions of previous seasons that they've kind of done with players or done a rebuild at a kind of weird time, or do you not see any validity in that?
Um, I haven't really seen anything like that. I think it was just there's there's rebuilds and then there's smashing the reset button, and that's kind of what they had to do. Um, they just they went as far into their championship window as they could before it slammed all the way shut. And at that point, you need to reevaluate, and you need to players obviously they wanted to go where there were opportunities to win championships. There was opportunity to play in bigger markets as we've talked about, and it's a challenge with Connecticut. Part of why I wanted to see the team move to Hartford is at least it's easier to sell on being right between Boston and New York instead of being down in down in the corner of the state where the biggest population area is New London. Which, no disrespect to New London at all. No, I love that corner of the state. It's just it's so out of the way. It's very hard to justify. Like Dejanay Carrington, who is my all-time favorite Sun player. I never expected to say that when she was drafted after her career ended against UConn in the way it
Stanford and
did.
Baylor.
Yeah. I could not believe that she became my favorite player, but I've got her jersey and everything. She's said, stuff that, we don't necessarily think about, but we need to start thinking about when it comes to professional women's athletes. She was going an hour away for, a proper, for getting her hair styled, for getting her nails done, stuff that's supposed to just be, basic and easy to get. And she couldn't find the right fits. It's a tough place to be if you want that. A lot of all these other teams are in cities, and you're living a certain lifestyle. It's you have to be committed, and there are players out there who really just wanted to compete and be on a be on a competitive WNBA team, and so they they had to slam the reset button, and I think they changed philosophy entirely by bringing in Rashid Meziani from overseas. Very rare to see a European coach come in into the WNBA. A lot of it is movement within the league. We see sometimes college coaches moving up. We see longtime WNBA assistants getting their shot, NBA coaches moving over. But this was a different move that the Sun made under Jen Rosati and Morgan Tuck, who I love having the UConn leadership there as president and GM. But he came in with a lot of promise and a lot of different thinking that we don't necessarily see in the WNBA, and he built a team based on that. There was more European flavor to the team. They were able to finally bring in Layla Lacan, who was a big draft pick 2 seasons ago but stayed in Europe. She came in the middle of last season, and you could see an impact right away when she came in. Tina Charles coming back last season was a big deal. Coming back to the Sun at the end of her career and having another opportunity in Connecticut where she loved being. You got a full season out of Marina Mabry, who is now going to be playing in Toronto, but a well-known, gives it everything she's got. Kind of one of the bullies of the league sometimes, but a phenomenal player. They brought in Aaliyah Edwards in a trade during the season. That was a huge deal for everyone around. And some other really good players on the team. Olivia Nelson-Ododa, obviously another UConn star, and someone whose name is on the wall at Gamble Pavilion, who grinded it out in training camp and made a name for herself with this new staff in Bria Hartley, who's been in the WNBA for a very long time and has dealt with injuries lately, is getting older and wanted a shot still. And she signed that training camp contract last year. I didn't think that it was going to really turn into anything, but I knew the talent was there, and she became one of the key players for the Sun last year. And whether it was just phenomenal to see, because it wasn't just she's a good player on a bad team. The WNBA last season was the best 156 players. I forget how many in the world, essentially, right? Like you're going to have a team of 12 or 13 of the best players in the world. Someone's got to be at the bottom, right? Like that's just, and it shifts, in this American sports complex where, there's the ebbs and flows as you struggle for a long time, you get better draft picks, you're able to build teams around those better players. The Sun were always at the disadvantage of never having that. They were so consistently good for so long without ever being truly great that they were always kind of middle of the draft and, trying to pair that with not being a prime destination for free agency. And they've had to build teams the hard way. And so I think last year was just an example of the challenges of that. And I don't think, to get back in a long-winded way to the nature of your question, I don't think that there was any, blowing things up to justify a sale. I think the tribe was really hopeful that there was going to be an opportunity to keep the team local, and the league just decided, as they continued to fight it, that was just not going to be the case. So it's unfortunate the way it played out, but I don't think there was ever any kind of tanking or trying to blow things up to justify it. So
No,
I think
no, and that's great.
it's
Yeah, and that's great insight, because that's something that I wasn't well versed in. You educating me there makes a lot of sense too. And like you said, the ebbs and flows of sports and franchises, especially with how they were on the cusp. Again, they have a New England Revolution esque
yeah.
resume when it comes to losing finals. And it's unfortunate they will, maybe they'll leave on the way out here with a surprise championship run. Who knows? That might be asking a little bit too much. But chances are they'll probably be competitive once they get to Houston. I know even today, looking at the Supersonics final game, which was packed, and that was kind of another crummy situation where it seems as though the writing is on the wall for the return of the Seattle Supersonics. But even though Oklahoma City did not win a championship with that Seattle drafted group, they at least got to one a few years later. I know in hockey, Quebec moved, and then immediately, they're winning and making Stanley Cups. So it kind of is fun. And then even Utah, the Coyotes move, and now that they're in the playoffs 2 years later. So there are examples where sometimes a move gives a good reset, or a new ownership group might put a little more money in or switch up the front office. But it sounds like they've been sort of building to the future wherever they were going to be playing anyway. And that's looking at Connecticut sports now, just in general. And Kevin Durant talked about this, and Geno did talk about it as well, how it's not only pressure, but also the exposure and state pride in UConn does stem from UConn being the pro team, sort of how University of Texas is Austin's. I know they have the Spurs have played there a couple times over the years, but I know they have a MLS team too. But Austin, with the biggest market without a baseball, basketball, football, or hockey team, but University of Texas is there. So even Connecticut, 3 to 4 million people, whatever it is now, not having a pro team, there is the population there. But I do want to have our really loyal listener, CT Mike, who does love New London, and I've seen him talking about this on Twitter, which he's made really good arguments. And one of the replies to him did mention how, because it's a change of ownership, that might be why the NBA/WNBA is justifying it as the relocation to Hartford, because it would be new owners. And I think that the Knicks still owned the Liberty when they were in Westchester, and then I think it didn't, or maybe it switched hands when they were still at MSG, and then they went to Westchester, and then the recent ownership group came in after they had already started playing Barclays. But whatever it is, they're going to find the way to justify it and use the language or phrasing to say, oh, well, this isn't, even though it's right in front of you, you can see this is not what's happening, despite it being the opposite case. But just from a Connecticut sports perspective, I was too young to remember the Whalers leaving. I remember the newspaper of their last game, and I see the highlights every year on the anniversary now. And I don't know if I watched the last game, but I remember that when I was 6, 7 ish, um, kind of getting out of being really into dinosaurs and getting into sports at that time in my life. And even I think the first NHL video game I had that was the first year of the Hurricanes. So that wasn't part of my sort of sports heartbreak as it is for other people who lived and breathed Whalers and were actual fans and went to the games and stuff. But the Bridgeport Islanders are moving to Hamilton, Ontario. That's not the level of the Sun, but even from a minor league perspective, Rockets going to Yard Goats. Norwich no longer has an affiliated baseball team. I rock their hats as much as I can, but the Maroons are long gone. That was kind of a situation where you took it for granted when you were a kid growing up, and then you realized how great it would be. But what do you see as the future here for? I think the Argots are definitely here to stay. I think the Wolfpack for sure, barring another Canadian city like Hamilton with that population and hockey fan base taking them away. But I think that the Argots obviously are definitely here to stay. But the Sun being the only true pro team Connecticut fans of our age have known after the Hartford Whalers move, you see a future for anything, whether it's even a G League team or even if it's just some. I mean, like the I know lacrosse and soccer has on a minor league scale with the Hartford Athletic. I know they're kind of the second division, and they play markets like Pittsburgh and Rhode Island and Oakland, which are major league markets or were.
Yeah.
What do you see as the future? Is there a chance for an MLS team? Do you think the WNBA would ever come back? What do you see as our future as the pro sports?
I think MLS is out of the realm of possibility at this point. I think there was an opportunity a while back, but that's now since gone. There would be too much oversaturation with the Revolution, with two teams in New York. I think they're pretty close to being done with expansion. I was going to say that I'm very happy to point out that we at least still do have a professional team with Hartford Athletic. It is the second division, but it is technically professional. They're coming off their first loss of the season this past weekend, but they had a great start, and they're actually coming off a season last year where they won a trophy, first professional sports trophy for Connecticut in a long time with the Jägermeister Cup where they beat Sacramento Republic. Those games are a lot of fun, and they're during the same time frame as the WNBA season, so I'll at least be able to scratch my itch of sports over the summer by going to some Hartford Athletic games. It's a lot of fun, especially when they play Rhode Island FC. You got the rival fans coming in from Rhode Island. There's green smoke all over the stadium. It's a cool little atmosphere, but obviously not the same as having a major professional team. And I think this is just another reminder with the Sun, like you said with the Whalers. I was slightly younger than you. I was still in my dinosaur phase, just turning 5 when they played their last game. But it was, my dad used to go to every Whalers game. It was such a big deal. But just a reminder of how Connecticut is perceived in the world of sports, and just the same way it is kind of perceived in just life in general. We're just that small little state in between Boston and New York. We're just kind of the drive through, and there's really not a lot here. All the rich people who work in New York live in Fairfield County, and the rest of us are just kind of here. And it sucks. That's the perception. And I guess it's tough if you want to talk about bringing a major sports team here. Well, there's already teams in all the major leagues in Boston. There's 1,000 teams in New York and New Jersey. So it just doesn't seem like there's any room for us at this point. But it just keeps, we just keep getting let down, right? Like the Whalers leaving, the Sun leaving, and in the middle of all of it was the tease of the New England Patriots moving to Hartford. And even though that really ended up just being a bargaining chip by the Kraft family to get what they wanted in Foxborough, it's another example of us just being kind of let down, and seeing Connecticut can only really have college basketball, which is great. We love college basketball. Where UConn is the basketball capital of the world, and it really is the heartbeat of the state. Right during the season, it's all anyone wants to talk about. It's our days are affected by UConn, by the men and the women, which I think is such a special thing. A lot of places you really just see it's the men's basketball team or it's the football team, but for us it's both the men's and women's basketball teams. And with our small little state and our small budget compared to these other big schools, we're also doing well in football these days. The hockey teams are both doing really well. There's so much to look forward to with that, but you still want to be in that professional sports landscape, and to just have a second division soccer team as your professional sports in the state is just really a bummer.
Yeah, and even I mean I didn't sip from the Jägermeister Cup, but I did go to, as you know, one of the Hartford Athletic games, and as a soccer novice, I will tell you that the dollar hot dogs and $2 beers were
Yeah,
definitely enticing. I would love to go back again, and just from the stadium perspective, like Dillon Stadium. I don't think it's called Dillon anymore. But
yeah.
whatever.
Trinity Health
It's
Stadium.
just
Yep.
beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, yeah. If Trinity Health wants to sponsor us, they can. But no, there's not a bad seat in the house, and you really
No.
get. It's a nice night out, and you get a great seat wherever you are. And even for someone like me who, um, I'm not going to fake it and say, oh, I love soccer. I don't understand it as well. I'll watch it this summer a lot. But that's where people should go to Hartford athletic games, just like the Argos are fun. They're equally as fun and a really nice place to see a game. Uh, I do think that's the thing. It's kind of only a couple more questions here because I know you got to run, but just to, I know it's moving the conversation backward, but in terms of kind of address our future very well there. It's a grim, bleak
Yeah.
outlook, but I think it's the realist perspective, unfortunately, where that does seem to be what it will be. Just like I'm sure people, I don't know if it's still a topic of conversation at Dave Matthews Band concerts anymore at the Meadows, but I know there would be like bring back the Whalers people, and I would always think of a city like Quebec that lost it and probably has more of an argument to get it back, despite the language, the first language being French and being, I think, a smaller market. You have those examples of teams still holding out hope, and I think a city like Seattle getting the Sonics back might sort of be an unfair comparison just with how Seattle's grown and despite the isolation, stayed such a major city. Um, but I'm sure it would be pretty cool to have something come here, whatever it looks like down the line. But where do you see for the WNBA continuing its expansion? This being the penultimate question, we've talked just them going back to the NBA model, which I thought it was cool. Obviously, Connecticut, even going to like a Tulsa was sort of how the NBA would go into a San Antonio or Sacramento, a market that didn't have anything, and see if it worked. I know it didn't work. They ended up going to the major market in Dallas, but um, even I don't think WNBA they're going to be looking at a South Carolina, maybe Tennessee. Lady Vols have been down. I know they've mentioned the NBA, even though I think Memphis Grizzlies have much better basketball history in Memphis, and it's a more important sports city. I think the NBA to be for Nashville. I know a lot of players in Nashville. That's more of a hot spot. Um, Maybe the WNBA would look at that if that move were to happen, that they would have an NBA partner in Tennessee that's still a rabid fan base despite their lack of recent long-term runs. You see Boston, as you alluded to, getting a team in the 2030s. You think the Celtics ownership group or even minority owners might pony up pennies to get that an expansion team, or what other cities would you be on the lookout for a WNBA expansion in the next 5 to 10 years?
I do think Boston is inevitable. For everything I've said, I think that that's part of the vision that the league has here is they see an opportunity down the line, probably around 2031 or something like that. They're going to see, 400, $500 million as an opportunity for an expansion fee out of Boston. And you're kind of depriving the area for now and trying to, build up that we want it back. We want it back. And, I think that's gonna be the case. I don't see the WNBA not in Boston long term. I think it's just a matter of when at this point. And obviously that's a booming women's sports market. You've got Boston Legacy starting this year in the NWSL. You've got the Boston Fleet, which has been doing really well in the Professional Women's Hockey League. I think Charlotte gets a team back at some point. I think as we're talking about Carolina, I don't see them going into South Carolina, but I do think going back to Charlotte is very realistic. Obviously, a basketball crazy area, the Carolinas. So I think that's inevitable at this point. I think Nashville would be a great market, but like we said, keeping it within the NBA. Is there an opportunity there where I don't think so, but the Grizzlies owners are involved. Would they play in Nashville? I don't think that ends up being the case. Uh, from there, I think you got to look at going back into Florida at some point, probably to, I think Miami could be, a good spot at some point, and that could kind of be, their idea of kind of rivaling unrivaled down there. That's their home base. Orlando, I don't see, I'd like to, as Orlando is a special place for me because of soccer. I'm an Orlando City and an Orlando Pride fan. Um, Blessed to have seen Orlando Pride win the NWSL title a couple years ago, but attendance down there has been strangely bad for a team that just came off a title a couple years ago. So I think there's a lot of factors that go into that are um, not necessarily due to success or anything like that, but that's more for the local folks down there to get into. Um, from there, you've hit a lot of the major markets already. Kansas City is probably one if you're going, but again, that's going outside the NBA model, so that might be off the table there. Um, they've tried Salt Lake City before with the Utah Silver Stars, that or the Utah Stars, and I believe they were the San Antonio Silver Stars. It's all I think it's all part of
And now
I
Las
think
Vegas, right?
yeah, they went to Las Vegas. Thank you. And obviously, you've got the NBA looking to go to Las Vegas now. I think they've tried in the other NBA markets. Sacramento had a team for a long time. The Monarchs, they're gone. Um, I can't believe the Comets won four in a row and they failed, but now they're coming back, and we'll see what happens there. But I think for the most part, you've really tapped into all of the major NBA markets, and so if they want to go outside the box, it would be probably Nashville. Miami is an NBA market, I guess. I don't know why I blanked on that. I don't watch the NBA
Well,
too
yeah,
much, but I
but
am
you
aware
know,
of the
but yeah,
Miami Heat.
yeah, but well, I try to ignore them, especially Tyler Hero, as much as I can. But yeah, that's the thing. The weird thing is with the two new NBA. I know it hasn't been completely announced, but it's worked well in Las Vegas with Mark Davis. I know Tom Brady's slightly involved there, but Mark Davis has seemed like a very good WNBA owner.
Yeah,
They have coached with him, and like they've had the roster, they've had the MVP and Wilson. So like it's been from coaching to players, and even they just win, so that helps too. But the Aces have done incredibly well, and they were now you have the Raiders, and well, you had the Vegas Golden Knights, and the Raiders, and then the A's going there. So the NBA has to kind of retake their summer league market, And I don't know if LeBron, if that's his target, to be involved in an ownership group, but that would kind of be what it would seem like. And then Seattle, the Storm, being successful there despite the
Yeah.
Sonics leaving, winning, having the legends as players. Obviously Stewart there forever, but Stewart having her run there before moving on. They've been so competitive, and them redoing the arena and then the Kraken going has kind of forced the NBA's hand as well. The Mariners and Seahawks doing well too. Like it's a market they need to be back there. And Kansas City is interesting. Like I do think, even though Oklahoma has had really good women's basketball teams, Oklahoma City, as I've said in previous podcasts, I don't really think it's a place I ever want to visit, nor do I really respect it there. I think it's a lot of very odd sort of Harrison Burge Vonnegut personas there in the crowd that just follow what they're told and are told to chant three letters and just chant OK in unison. It's very scary to me. And I really hope if the Celtics see them in the finals, it turns out to see them the Patriots and have had their championship run stopped on the cusp of the title. But I think Kansas City is a possibility because the NBA, that would be, my opinion, even though they have the Kings franchise that's moved so much over the years. Rochester Royals and then the Omaha, but the Sprint Center has been sitting there, and they've tried with the NHL. I put like try in air quotes because I don't know how close it got, but that arena downtown in Kansas City is now outdated. But conceivably, you could have housed, aside from an arena football team in the Big 12 tournament, you could have had an NHL and an NBA team. And I think that would kind of be one of the possibilities down the road. But yeah, Nashville, I think if the NBA were to go there, that kind of would make sense. But it would be a gut punch for the Connecticut fans because UConn and Tennessee rivalry is so great, and then you're able to get a team state just because Nashville's an up-and-coming city. And then, as you said, Charlotte, I missed that one because Charlotte, very close to the South Carolina line. You could just kind of be, even though I think they were the Charlotte thing, you could kind of just say you're Carolina, whatever. But last question. Thank you so much for taking the time tonight, number one. But last question, is there a scenario where you would return if there is a Boston expansion team, if there is, again, what I think the Philadelphia franchise should do is try to get Don Staley as their coach, and then you could root against Don Staley or something, just like I loved rooting when he was involved in WNBA. Is there a scenario where you, Tim, become a WNBA fan again that doesn't involve a return of basketball to the state of Connecticut?
It's a really tough question because I thought about it after all the news broke about this Houston sale, and I had been very adamantly against the Boston option. When the Hartford option was sitting there all that time, I was like, if the Hartford option is on the table and it goes to Boston, I'll be very upset. I don't think I can recover from that. At the point that the announcement came, I was like, Boston would have been kind of palatable at least. I wouldn't have been at every game. It would have been a different relationship with the team, with the league, but I think I would have been able to get over that a bit more. It's still, they still would have been that same team to me. This whole sale has gone about in a way that has basically just said the Connecticut Sun are dead at the end of this year, and then it's going to be, they're kind of erasing this history. And there's all this talk about, the 4-time champs are back with the Houston Comets. So everything's just rubbed me so wrong. The way the league has handled all this, I think it would take a lot, to be honest. I think it would involve a future without Kathy Engelbert as the WNBA commissioner. I think that would make a lot of people happy, to be perfectly honest. So I think that would be a win for a lot of folks. I'd have to really reflect on it more, like when that materializes, because I think it's when, it's not if. I think 5 years is a long time, And I think that's kind of the window we're looking at in terms of a potential team in Boston. I'd have to kind of consider where the league is. Am I willing to forgive the sins of the past and, you know, go from there? Obviously, it would be, like I said, it would be different. I wouldn't be at every game like I am now. I wouldn't necessarily be watching as much as I have in the past. Like I said, I've watched so many games that didn't involve the Sun. If it's on, I'm watching it. But that's a situation that's going to change going forward. And so I think I'd have to sit with it. I could be open to it. As much bluster as I've had over the last, couple of weeks saying this is it, I'm done, never again. It would be something that I would really have to think about and see how it comes together. You know, who's involved, who's running the league at that point. What's the state of things, and go from there. But I'll leave the door cracked. I'll say that.
Yeah, that's a good approach. And I know I said I was going to let you go. I do have one more follow up just to
Fire
kind of try
away.
to end on. I like your optimistic perspective, so I do want to try to end on one more positive note here. But I will say that, and I'll keep the tape on the hat for now until you're ready to re-embrace. The tape will stay over the logo. But like I do think Boston would be sick. I know we had a previous podcast and post going through possible names if they were to stay in New England. Um, just as those who hear the shrill cry of the banshee do die, I will die on the hill that the team name in Boston needs to be the Boston Banshees, despite I believe there's another women's team having that. I think you need to pony up if you're ponying up 400 to 5 million, 500 million for a franchise. I think the Boston owners need to find that team and get the Banshees as a name because I think that would be the coolest team name to match with the Celtics. I know the rumor with the previous ownership group of the Celtics said that would have been the charm, which is kind of all right. But that, that's my hope that there is a Boston Banshees team playing in the Garden. And not some arena by the casino where they're probably going to build the Revs. They're going to build the Revs new stadium in Everett or
Yeah,
somewhere
yeah,
by the casino. Yeah, so I hope the Celtics don't relocate out there, which has been rumored. I know they'd have the Bruins having the arena kind of might force their hand eventually, but I think that would be really cool to have summer dates of the WNBA in Boston, whenever that might be. So as close your podcast with me tonight. Hopefully, you can come back on. Hopefully, we're talking during the summer something about the Sun overachieving and putting a capper on their final season in Connecticut. What is going to be your outlook? As you said, you're going to be there fully in person and fully embrace this final year. So, give me some specifics. What are you looking forward to? Just as a fan going to Mohegan Sun, the place that you've been going, as a fan for so long to watch your favorite team, and as it's coming to a close, and then you can wrap up with any other final thoughts.
yeah. I think what's been interesting to me over the last week or so as WNBA free agency has opened up is the contracts that you're seeing from the few players that have signed with the Sun. For the most part, they've been 1 year contracts. Brittany Grinders is a 1 year. Obviously, there's a plan in place, trying to get her to Houston at some point. But it looks like they're really building a team, like I said, to compete now. That not a title contender, perhaps. Obviously the Liberty are going to be stacked. The Fever stacked. The Aces. The Wings got so much better in the last 3 days, but the Atlanta Dream might actually be the favorite in the one of the preseason favorites because they're loading up. But I'm seeing a team that's being put together that is going to compete, that is going to play really hard and play for Connecticut. And I think that's been the rallying cry from Jen Rosati and from Morgan Tuck. And I keep thinking about how mad I am at the WNBA. I'm not mad at the Sun. I'm not mad at the Tribe. And there are a lot of people who are going to be in that arena every single day who are losing their jobs as a result of this. The the ticket personnel that my wife and I deal with on a daily basis, some of the communication staff, the event staff, people who have worked for the team for a long time. This is it for all of us. And so I think there's going to be a real, I think it kind of like, um, and you were there, so you remember the year that the UConn men's basketball team was banned from the postseason, that 2012-13 season. It felt different on campus, right? Like it felt like we were all so unified around that team and around what we all felt like was an injustice, um, and it brought everyone together. And so I've been getting the sense that that's what this season's going to be like, because it's not just they're not relocating. They're not going to be the Houston Sun. They're not going to they're not keeping the history of this team. The Connecticut Sun are done at the end of the season. So I think we're all just taking these last few months and just uniting together and giving it everything we've got to support this team and cheer on this club that we've cared about for so long. And I think that's going to lead to a really special environment at the casino.
No, well said, Tim. That's perfectly put. And yeah, like last season, hopefully, even if it doesn't end on a high note, that it's a memorable one and an enjoyable one. Always appreciate talking to you. Sometimes tonight talking to you, I forgot we were even recording. I could sit and talk to you for hours and almost did. So love always seeing you and talking to you. Looking forward to doing this again. To all our listeners, thank you. I think this will be a good subject, despite it being a bad situation for Connecticut fans to revisit as it moves forward and comes to its conclusion. So, any final thoughts, Tim?
No, I think we covered quite a bit. I really appreciate you having me on. Always a pleasure to chat with you and Colin, and hope everything's going well.
Same to you, and thank you again, Tim. Appreciate you. Thank you to our listeners, as always, and appreciate you all. Thank you for being part of our flock.